Welcome everybody. We're so glad you're here, and just wanted to also welcome all of our alumni that are joining us online today. So just for those in the room that don't know, this is a hybrid event, what we call a hybrid event. So we've got alumni all across the country that are joining us for today's session. So welcome to you out there, wherever you're watching us from. Here in Indiana, we're do a snowstorm tonight and tomorrow, so we're thankful that we scheduled this for today and not tomorrow. So welcome, we're glad you're here. My name is Leslie, and I help Purdue people, fans and friends who love Purdue stay connected, get involved, and give back. Before we get into today's presentation, I want to take just a moment to share more about our work at the Foundation. We were established in 2020, and we are the cornerstone for all things alumni, fan, and friend related. As you'll see on the next slide, the engagement team at Purdue offers a variety of opportunities to get involved. We've got lifetime learning opportunities and workshops like today. We've got alumni club outings. We've got game watches, affinity network opportunities, volunteer projects, and lots of different travel destinations to explore. So before we jump into our presentation with Angie today, I want to share just a short video that will talk a little bit more about our work at the Foundation.
Stay connected, get involved, give back. We help people who love Purdue do just that. The Purdue for Life Foundation was created in 2020 by uniting the Purdue Alumni Association and the University Development Office. We're here to serve and advance Purdue, working across the West Lafayette campus and far beyond it. At a high level, Purdue for Life includes the Purdue Alumni Association, President's Council, John Purdue Club, and the brand new Parents and Families Club. We also encompass Purdue Foundation Student Board and Purdue Alumni Student Experience, or PACE, the largest student organization on campus. We connect Boilermakers throughout the world to the university through region and interest-based clubs and networks. In fact, we have more than 70 alumni clubs around the country, international alumni networks in more than 100 cities across the globe, and multiple affinity networks, including Purdue Black Alumni Organization and Purdue Women's Network. And we're just getting started. What does it all mean for you? One organization is now driving and coordinating all alumni, friend, and fan-related activities, and offering you even more ways to engage with the university you love across your lifetime. We're streamlining communications and making our flagship digital magazine, Purdue Alumnus, available to all Boilermakers. We're offering a wealth of new and expanded opportunities for you to stay connected and get involved through alumni living and through lifelong learning, volunteerism, travel, and recent graduate programs. And you don't want to miss our signature events. There are countless opportunities for those who love Purdue to make an impact through giving their time, talent, and treasure. And what an impact you made during the fiscal year that just ended. The collective generosity of our Purdue family reached an all-time high. Talk about a giant leap. You are powering Purdue. Thanks to you, Purdue continues to strengthen its reputation in teaching and research while remaining affordable and accessible to brilliant young minds. And because of you, Purdue is stronger than ever. Together, through small steps and giant leaps, we can grant even more opportunities for future Boilermakers as we ensure Purdue grows ever stronger.
It's our privilege at Purdue for Life and our persistent pursuit to help people who love Purdue stay connected, get involved, and give back. On behalf of our team, thank you and Boiler Up.
Well, as you can see, as I mentioned earlier, we have lots of ways to get involved, stay connected, and give back. So if anybody has any questions after today's presentation, I'll be around to answer questions. And you can always find me on email as well. So with that, just a few housekeeping items. If you're joining us online, your microphones have been muted. But if you have questions during the workshop today, please enter those in the chat feature, and we'll get to those at the end of today's session. And for those that are live here in the audience with us, if you parked in the parking garage, don't forget to get your ticket validated on the way out today. We're also recording today's session, and it will be available on our Purdue for Life website within the coming weeks. So you can watch it again there or share it with family and friends. So with that, let's meet today's guest, Angie Klink. We're excited to have you. Angie graduated with a communications degree from what is now the Brian Lamb School of Communication. She's the author of 10 books. She writes memoirs, biographies, histories, documentaries, children's books, essays, and even advertising copy. If you aren't familiar with Angie's books, you will be pleased to know that many of her works focus on Purdue University. 2 of her most recent books, WBAA and Pledge and Promise, were just published last year in 2022. She has 3 other books published by Purdue University Press, The Dean's Bible, Kirby's Way, and Divided Paths, Common Ground. And we can't forget about the ever-popular children's book, Purdue Pete Finds His Hammer. Angie is a lifetime member of the Purdue University President's Council, a lifetime member of the Purdue Alumni Association, and a longtime member of the John Purdue Club. Welcome, Angie.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, everybody out there today, so appreciate it.
Well, this is just a real treat for us to
Thank
get
you.
to meet you in person and to see your books firsthand, and for those joining us online, we're just so glad that you're here. You have a lot of titles, right? Author, advertising copywriter, essay, children's books. So you had a moment you shared with me early on in your life that was a strong indicator you just might become a writer.
Yeah, I didn't know that though.
Tell us how that happened.
It was in 4th grade, and the librarian at Vinton Elementary in Lafayette had us create books, children's books. We wrote and illustrated our own book. I still have my book. The title of it is The Day the Peanut Butter Factory Blew Up, and I won a blue ribbon for the book. But and we bound them ourselves. We illustrated it, the whole 9 yards. And so Miss Rose, the librarian, that happens to be my middle name, she typed on the typewriter a little note in here that said, "What a messy story. No, it is really a cute story, and all or almost all children like peanut butter, so they can imagine the mess of peanut butter all over. Even your cover looked like peanut butter." Well, this is contact paper. Remember in the 70s, my mom had this in the drawer and in the kitchen, and it looked like peanut butter, so I used it. So anyway, that was my first book, but I had no clue that I would become a writer at that point. So.
Well, we're glad that you did. We're glad that you had early recognition from somebody, the librarian, that sort of maybe coached you on your way even early on. Yeah. So you were destined to write from an early age. So you graduate from high school. You end up at Purdue.
Yep.
How did you choose Purdue, and why communications?
Purdue was really there was never a question to go anywhere else. My father, my brothers, my sisters all went to Purdue. My father was a real Boilermaker for the Nickel Plate Railroad.
Wow.
And before I was born. And so he saw that steam engines were going to be replaced by diesel. This is in Frankfurt for the Nickel Plate. And decided, while he also had 3 children and his first wife, would go to Purdue. And so he went by day, drove from Frankfurt, and worked at night on the Nickel Plate as a real Boilermaker. And then when he graduated, the year before I was born, because his wife died during all that, his first wife, and he married my mother, then he became a Purdue Boilermaker. So, and then my 2 brothers, they're all engineers. The males are all electrical and aeronautical. So it was just in my blood, and we lived in Lafayette. My father actually worked for Purdue at the time, and so I went to Purdue.
So everybody else was engineering, but you were like, no, I'm going to carve my own path here.
He would bring home, he worked in Fraser Hall as a utility engineer. He was an electrical engineer by the power plant. It's since been taken down. He actually moved into it when it was brand new in the 70s. Looked like a giant olive on the inside because it was all in like olive green and orange. And I remember going to the open house, when I was in grade school. But anyway, he would bring home, everything, of course, no online, these booklets that he'd want me either to be a pharmacist or, some sort of scientific, because he was looking for my future financially. So I wanted communication. So,
right. Okay.
He went with it finally.
Okay. So you graduated in 1981. Can we say that?
Yeah.
1981. All right. So did you
counting.
Did you have dreams? All right, so you graduate communications. Did you have dreams of becoming an author, or did you just think, I just want to get a job, land that first job, and get into advertising?
The reason I liked communication was that I went to Jefferson High School, and we have a real WJF 91.9 radio station that I was active in. So I loved that, and I did commercials on the closed circuit TV in the school, and I loved all that, but I didn't know what I would do with it if that's what I majored in, even though I ended up doing that. I didn't want to be a journalist, and I didn't want to be an anchor, but I didn't know what I was going to do with it. So, I mean, in a sense, that related. My first job then out of Purdue was at WASK Radio as an advertising copywriter. So I wrote 60 and 30-second commercials, which were, looking back, a really good foundation for writing. You have to grab the listener's attention. It's called the theater of the mind, which is really a podcast today. Radio is like a podcast. And write succinctly and creatively. And so, but I would never have guessed then that I would write a book like the Dean's Bible that's like 450 pages. I would never have ever thought that I would have landed there when I was at WASK. So.
Okay. So 23 years. 23 years you spent writing copy, freelancing, raising her family, right? I know we talked about that off camera, that that was important to her, right? She wanted to spend time raising her family, as most mothers do. But then something happened. You signed up for a writing class at the local community center. And
yes,
that sort
right
of
across the street at Morton. Well, it was called Morton there. It's now Sonia Marjoram Civic Building. But Kathy Mayer, a local writer, for those of you from around here, she was a business writer, but she also wrote poetry and essays, and she taught a class at Morton called Writing from Life, based on a book by Susan Wittig Albert by the same title. And it was the first time I started to really write personal essays. Each week we had a topic, we wrote about it, we sat in a circle, which was very daunting. It was all women, and read whatever personal story that we had. And so after that class ended, I think after 6 to 8 weeks, there was a group of us that wanted to continue. So we created a writing group that I was part of for 10 years after that, called Women's Inc. And we did the same sort of thing. We had a topic, and we'd meet twice a month and write about a topic and read it. So several of those pieces I've had published in Chicken Soup for the Soul books. I think I'm in 5 different ones, a couple of Christmas ones, and Sister Soul, and there's one for every soul out there. So anyway, that's what got me going with essays. And a lot of them were funny, and I started to go to the Irma Bombeck Writers Workshop, which is at the University of Dayton. I've been to that 5 times. So that's also sort of a humor, if you remember Irma Bombeck, she had a syndicated humor column, and so another avenue.
Okay, so 10 years, you're over there, you've got these group of women that you write with on a regular basis. Yeah. Kids are growing up at this point.
Yeah, that kept me writing while my kids were little. Yeah.
So you found that you had more time to write. How on earth does somebody from a writer's circle say, I think I'm gonna do a children's book about a hammer?
Yes, that's Purdue Pete Finds His Hammer. If you haven't seen it, it's a lift the flap book. Get to one of the flaps here. Here, Mackie. Okay, so I have 2 sons, Jack and Ross. They're both Purdue grads. Ross was a baby. He's the younger one. And we were members of John Purdue Club. We were going to go on a Purdue trip to Florida, and he was maybe 9 months, 10 months old, and whenever he would see Purdue Pete, when we would go to functions, he was just like in love with him. So I thought, what if we have I go find a Purdue Pete children's book that we can take on this little trip. I could read to him. Well, I came to the Spirit Shops, there was none, and I filed that away. Wouldn't that be cool to write a Purdue Pete children's book? And so it wasn't until he was 4 that I mentioned it in another writing group I was in, and the women encouraged me to write it. And so I actually went home that week and wrote, it's a rhyming verse. Writing the verse was the easiest part. And so then I decided to self-publish it because it was a niche market, Purdue alumni, and so I just methodically, I had to get Purdue licensing for it. That was really the hardest part. That was like filling out Medicare forms, which my husband was familiar with because we had drugstores, so he helped me with that. And I hired illustrators, and it took me 2 years, so he was 6 when it was published, and I still remember when I got 2 copies delivered to the house, and they were both home, and we sat down on the floor, and I opened it up, and it makes me cry when I want to talk about it. Because they had watched me for 2 years, the ups and downs. It wasn't always easy. It was really a lot of work. And to see it then really, and to hold it. And so it's got a lot of what we call today Easter eggs. The final spread has Jack and Ross's names on it. And then Tyler and Evan are the illustrator's sons' names. he did this really great Purdue feat that doesn't scare children. And, but since then, if you all know Tyler Trent,
You're right.
passed away of cancer, the student. Since then, the name Tyler has taken on some other significance. Sometimes people think about Tyler Trent when they see that. And then on the back, I decided to call my publishing company Mascots for Kids, and the illustrator used our dog, Chloe, as the, so that's Chloe on the back, and she lived to be 16, and then we have a new dog that almost looks exactly like Chloe, so it can now also be Smidge. So anyway, that is how that book came to be.
I love it.
It's now in its third printing. That was 2004.
And I just have to say, for anybody that hasn't already thought of this, but you probably have, they make the best children's book or baby gift books.
Oh,
so
yeah.
whenever I've got friends or anybody that's bringing a new baby home, it's like they get a book.
Yep,
So
yep.
it makes a great baby
Lots
gift.
for
Love
baby
that
shower
one.
gifts. Yeah.
And Angie and I decided we debated whether we would even talk about this, but I think we should. So we'll
Yeah.
just show it really quickly.
Well, yeah, a few years later, then I did an IU version because I'm sorry, but IU people needed a Purdue person to write it. So, don't hurt me if you're an IU fan. Anyway, so it came out in 2007, same concept, but IU doesn't have a mascot. So I used the letters I and U, and they're as characters. And again, each book is filled with campus landmarks. The stadium and the fountain, they each have their fountain, and they're both lit the flaps. So it was the same concept, sample gates, if you're familiar with IU. So, and then in the back, I have nieces and nephews who went to IU, and so I asked what can we put in the back that would resonate with IU alum? And I guess this was, I don't know if it still is, a famous classroom where every freshman had a class. So I made that the last classroom there. So
Love
that's
it.
that.
Yep.
We won't put it on top of Pete though.
So, no pun intended, you cut your teeth on the children's books,
Yeah.
but then you set your sights on writing a biography. So book number 2, Divided Paths, Common Ground, was published 7 years later. So how did you go from writing children's books to this biography?
Okay, so a lot of you may know John Norberg, who writes about a lot of Purdue history and has a lot of books on Purdue astronauts and more. And I knew John. He once was a writer, a journalist for the Journal and Courier here in Lafayette. And I ran into him on 3 separate occasions in 2009, just out in the community. And each time he said, Angie, there's a new director at Purdue University Press, and if you have an idea for a book, you should write a proposal and give it to him. First time he said it, I'm like, okay, I had never really thought about it. Third time he said it, I'm thinking, okay, is he giving me a hint here? I should be doing this. So I sat down and thought, you know what, I think Purdue needs a book about Amelia Earhart, because even though we are familiar with her connection here, you talk to somebody else who's not affiliated with Purdue, and they don't know that we've helped fund her Lockheed Electra that, she got lost in. So, and many other things, that she was here teaching engineering, she was an advisor to women, all that. So I worked hard, did a lot of research on a proposal. I actually walked it over to the Purdue Press, went home. Next day I get an email from the new director, who was Charles Watkinson at the time. Can you come in and talk to me? I'm like, wow, okay. So I go in, and he says, first thing he says, we don't have money to pay authors for books. I'm like, oh, I'm thinking, why am I sitting here? I'm not going to give it away. Anyway, and so he goes, but we do have money for another book. And what it became this book. Dean of Home Economics Emeritus, Eva Goebel, she had wanted a book about Mary Matthews. She was the first female dean on campus of home economics. Matthews Hall is named after her. And she was a colleague of hers. She worked for her way back when. And they also thought they wanted a book on the woman who headed up Extension. When Extension started in 1911, Lella Gaddis, she was called the first state leader of home demonstration, meaning she and her agents went out into Indiana as part of Extension to bring the university to the people and educate women who were often isolated on farms. And so they thought they'd put both these women together because they didn't think they had enough information about Mary Matthews because her papers were burned when she died. So he gives me like one article he had about Mary Matthews, and he puts that in front of me. He says, we don't have much, but there could be more on Lola Gaddis in Purdue Archives. And so then he says, would you like to write that book? And I just said, yes. I had never been asked that question, and I'd never done it before. So, but I thought, well, this sounds like an opportunity, and there was money for that book. So Eva Goebel was about to turn 100 years old that year. I think she lived to be 106 or so. But, I interviewed her because she knew both the women. So, but come to find out, there was a lot more to find out because they told me to go visit Miriam Epple-Heath, who is a Purdue alum. She still lives at Westminster. She was the great niece-in-law of Lola Gaddis, and to go visit her, she might have more information. So I go visit her. She said, now, Aunt Lola, that's what she called her, lived with her other aunt, her sister, Kate, who was a school teacher in Lafayette, her whole life. And Miriam had her diaries. They were line-a-day diaries. Miriam leaves, she comes back with this shoebox, and you can see pictures of it on my website. It was for like shoes. The shoebox was antique. She takes off the lid, and I could smell the leather. They were these line-a-day diaries about this big, embossed with the year. It went from 1909 to 1949. They were sandwiched in there like sardines. And I like, oh my gosh. She says, here, you can take these. There might be something in there. Well, that changed everything. So I used the diaries to guide me to write this book, and I used excerpts. And this book will always be special because of that. I really got to know Kate Gaddis, even though she lived 100 years before I did, by reading her diaries and writing this book. So that is the very long answer to this, but a very special answer that I don't know if John Norberg knew Eva Goebel wanted a book written. I don't know if he knew all that and said, Angie, go over there. But that's how it happened.
You were in the right place at the right time.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Thanks to
and
John.
we're so grateful. So I love you. When Angie and I first met and started talking about this, she shared the story about the shoebox full of diaries, and it just really stuck with me. You write in the preface, and I quote, over the course of 5 months, I read Kate's diaries, sentence by sentence, day by day, year by year. The more I read, the more humbling became the experience of writing Divided Paths, Common Ground, end quote. How did it humble you?
Well, I was the one picking and choosing her words that would go out forever in this book. And that was kind of daunting. And at the end of it, she dies. She's not in very good health, but she keeps writing in her diary, and it's snowing outside, and it's December, and I was finishing the book in December, and she said something about the year is dying in a light white blanket, which is what I titled that last chapter, because then she died, in the next year. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was very poignant. So I felt like I'd lost a friend by the end of the diaries. So
I bet.
That's
that's a neat story.
Yeah.
So moving on. So she writes this really nice biography that she didn't know she was going to write.
That's right.
Book number 3 was published the very next year, right? In 2012?
Yes.
Kirby's Way. So tell us about this book. How did you end up with the privilege of writing this? Because again, different book.
Yeah. Jim Risk, the son of Kirby and Carolyn Risk, who is now the head of Kirby Risk Corporation, asked me to write down the stories about his parents. They were so giving in their community, in their business. They gave to Purdue. They each attended Purdue for about a year, but neither graduated. Carolyn only had enough money for 1 year. And then Kirby you couldn't tame Kirby. And so he borrowed $500 from his father and started Kirby Risk, what became Kirby Risk, which is now a multi-million-dollar company in the Midwest. So it's about how together they founded the company, but also about all their giving. They're giving to international students. They gave to Purdue Glee Club. They helped finance their very first European trip. A picture of the Glee Club hung in the Kirby Risk office, which used to be downtown, if you know where. I'm not going to remember what's there, but it's like where is that? It used to be a mill, so now flour comes down, but I'll think of it later. It's in the book. So it's about their giving heart, and Kirby's favorite song was "Mankind is My Business," and he loved it when the Glee Club sang that. They used to sing it every year at the Christmas show, and they sang it at some special events. When they had a special anniversary, they'd have a Glee Club representatives come and sing that, and that is exactly how he lived his life. He made mankind his business, but he happened to own an electrical supply company. So I saw where there's going to be some classes or a course on ethics. I think it's in Cranard. If you want a course on ethics, read Kirby's Way, because they were very ethical people and a great lesson on how to run your life and your business. So,
I love that, and I just think that, right, they're Lafayette icons, right? I mean, if you're from the Lafayette area, everybody knows Kirby Risk, right?
Yeah.
Company. So
yeah,
I love that
in the
you
Midwest,
were.
Yeah.
Yeah. What a privilege.
And he was very
and an
quirky,
honor.
so he's fun to write about. He was a night owl. Sometimes they would come to work in the morning. He'd be asleep on the conference table. He loved sweets, frozen custard, Mary Lou Donuts. That's where he would conduct business, at Mary Lou Donuts in the middle of the night. I mean, he was just so quirky. And he got things done in Lafayette, behind the scenes, a lot of it. You wouldn't even know all he gave to, because he didn't want people to know.
So a year sounds fast to turn a book around, right? So
yeah, I had already begun some interviews, I think before Divided Paths, because it was at first just going to be for the family. And then Purdue Press was interested in publishing it, so it became a book.
nice.
So.
Yeah, we're so lucky. So several books under your belt at this point, right? So now you're like a full-fledged author, right? You're not just the writing group. You're like, you've actually got books under your belt. But they're all different types of writing, right? You had children's books at this point, Purdue history, family history. How hard was it to change gears?
Did I change gears?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, you mean with each one?
Yeah, going from
I don't know.
children's books to, researching all the Purdue history to then,
I
talking
guess
to
it
family
felt like
members.
a natural progression. I don't know. I was up for the task, so I didn't really,
You did not, it's because you're a professional writer.
Thanks.
So this is the one I'm most excited about and can't wait to dive into. So the next book
Bible.
is her longest book, and she referenced this earlier. It's 446
Nice
pages of literally a history lesson of Purdue and the greater Lafayette community in the early 1900s, right? So it had to take lots of research to write this book.
It did. This photo is iconic. It's called Five Deans Walking. They're standing at the edge of the Purdue golf course behind Bev Stone and Barbara Cook's house. It was the day Betty Nelson, who's sitting here in the audience, received a secret Bible that she knew nothing about, even though she'd known these women since the 1960s. And that's why it's called the Dean's Bible. There was a Bible that they handed down for almost 100 years that was a secret among those women. How it happened was the very first Dean of Women, part-time Dean of Women, was Carolyn Shoemaker. She lived at Varsity Apartments, which is still standing across from Harry's, and she didn't show up for a presentation she was going to make at Duncan Hall in Lafayette, and come to find out she had passed away in her room at Varsity Apartments. So then President Elliott hired Dorothy Stratton from California to come and become the first full-time Dean of Women. And it was in Fowler Hall, which doesn't exist anymore. It was a gorgeous building that was torn down. Basically stood where in Stewart Center is, where there's the Fowler Hall, which is still named after Eliza Fowler, who gave the money for it. And there's a portrait over there. But at the top of Fowler Hall, Dorothy goes into this. She said it was more like the closet of the Dean of Women, not the, the Dean of Women office. And she moved into Carolyn Shoemaker's desk and found her Bible. Everything else had been cleaned out, but there was her Bible, and she hung on to it. And then when Helen Schliemann became the next Dean of Women, and they were friends, she worked at Purdue and worked with Dorothy, she decided that she would sign that Bible, said how it had belonged to Carolyn Shoemaker, and that she had it, wrote down a favorite Bible verse, and passed it to Helen Schliemann, and so it went. It went with every woman. But like I said, Betty had just become Dean of Students. She'd worked as associate dean and in the office with these other women for years, and they invited her to lunch. And Barbara Cook, who had had the Bible before her, hands her this tattered, there's a picture of it back here, but there's more pictures you can see inside, this brown Bible, and Betty's like, why are you handing me this? And then they explained it to her. And so it was given to her. Now it's preserved in Purdue Archives. So that's just a thread that guides you through this book, but there's so much more. All these women, they were feminists, social activists, they were impeccable leaders. Talk about ethics, another good book for ethics. Very high integrity and high standards to help students and their colleagues. But you're right, it's everything from the feminine mystique. If you don't know that book, look it up. That was one of Helen Schliemann's Bibles back when it came out in the 60s. And she gave all freshman girls a copy 1 year before they came to campus. So these were just amazing women. So I could talk forever. And then, of course, there's all the SPAR element. Dorothy Stratton was the founder of SPARS. She named SPARS, the Women's Reserve of the Coast Guard during World War II, and Helen Schliemann was her right-hand woman. So they went off to SPARS during World War II. So there's a lot in this book. And Michelle Obama christened a Coast Guard cutter in name of Dorothy Stratton. It's the Stratton. That was in 2009, I believe, if I'm getting my year right. So also a picture of Michelle christening Dorothy's cutter. So there's so many stories.
A lot of cool stories.
Yeah.
I'm going to I got this book from Angie probably 6 months ago, and I'm working my way through it. It's fascinating. I mean, the history in there alone. I mean, just about Purdue University, and like you said, all of the changes that happened during the course of those years. And we mentioned that Betty Nelson is in the audience. She's one of the 5 deans from the book, and you wrote in the book, she is still holding down the spiritual fort here on earth for her predecessors. So we just wanted to take a moment to say thank you, Betty. We're so glad you're in our audience and still in our community and in our lives. If you've never met Betty before you leave today, wave at the camera, Betty. You're on camera. If you haven't met Betty, you should. She knows anything and everything about Purdue University and is so giving and philanthropic in the Lafayette community. So we're blessed. Thank you for joining us. All right, so in the book, before we leave this book, you write that all of your books have left a mark, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm sure all authors feel this way. But the Dean's Bible transformed you the most. From these distinguished women, you wrote, "They removed the scales from my eyes." What does that mean?
Well, that was one of the Bible verses, so I used it. But I think it opened my eyes to what women can accomplish, to their leadership, to just how to live your life, both, at work and just every day. And then I got a new friend, a new mentor in Betty Nelson and Sally Watlington, who was a friend and also helped the deans throughout their lives. And Helen Schliemann was a great influence on her to become a Navy captain, to join the Navy. So I still both have those 2 women in my life as mentors, and so that was huge to get something that wonderful.
Great book. We're so lucky to have that one in our Purdue archives as well. So thank you. So that's a pretty heavy research book, right? I'm sure that took some time,
I went
right?
through the papers of each dean plus more. So yeah.
So
in Purdue archives.
You would think you might want to take a break from writing, but she did not take a break. Just last year, 2 more books were published. WBAA, 100 Years as the Voice of Purdue.
Yeah, it's a pictorial coffee table book. So, and I was asked, it turned 100 last year, and so I was asked to write the book in commemoration of its 100th birthday. So, has a lot of really great photos. I just noticed that this book jacket is on upside down, so, so, wait a minute, it was printed upside down. No, the jacket's on upside down.
So 50% off today.
But it was great fun, because then I was combining my love of radio and my love of Purdue. So it was great fun to write.
Yes.
Lots of good, fun history in that.
And at the same time, they both came out about the same time, right?
Because of COVID, they were like July and August of last summer. This one, the Dean of Students Office asked me to write a history of fraternity, sorority, and cooperative life called Pledge and Promise. And it's not like each house has its history. It's more like an overall, high view of everything, from the fun to the not so fun. And it's honest, But again, this has 270 pictures in it, which I did help curate probably half of those. So that's what also took a while. I finished the manuscript in 2017, and it came out last summer. So that's, takes a lot of time to find all those pictures.
And if I'm remembering correctly, I mean, one of the things I remember reading, I think it might have been in, I don't know if it was the Dean's Bible or Divided Paths, you talk about how sorority life came to be in some of her other books. So there's like this thread that's woven through many of your books.
There are definitely overlaps, yeah.
Yes, there are.
Yes.
Yeah, fascinating. Yeah, I think it was the part where one of the women deans didn't like that some women got picked to be in sororities and some did not.
Dorothy Stratton. Yes.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah.
So
they would come to her office crying.
Yeah.
They weren't picked for the one they wanted. And this was in the fall, and she didn't like that. Here they were trying to get accustomed to being a freshman. And then on top of it, they were like, all crying over not getting what they wanted for a house. And so she changed it to January to be for Rush. But then I think it's since changed back, hasn't it, Betty? Yeah. So I think I would know I wrote a book, but I have a lot of facts swimming around in here. So.
But I love that that's how some of those things came about, right? I mean, these were all people that impacted for years to come.
Yes, and it was like that for years.
Yeah. All right, so I know you're proud of all your books. Do you have a favorite?
I've had people ask me that before. It's like, Sophie's Choice or something. No, I can't say I have a favorite, really. I love them all. But like I said, Divided Paths is really special to me because it's my first book, but the Dean's Bible is too. And then, they all have these great stories I've told you about. And so it's like, you can't choose among your children. So.
Yeah, true. So. Were you getting ready to share something else?
Oh, well, I have these postcards for Pledge and Promise. And it has the QR code to order it. But plus, it's on my website. All these are on my website. But it's good to order that one through the QR code because that comes directly from the Dean of Students office rather than Amazon. So you'll help Purdue out more if you order from that.
So angieklink.com.
Yes.
angieklink.com if you're interested in checking out her books, reading a little bit more about them. Lots of pictures before you order. Let's see. All right. Let's talk about your upcoming projects. So all of these have been really, heavy Purdue, right? Yep. So your next project you shared just a little bit with me about. It's a little bit more personal.
Yeah, I just finished the first draft of a manuscript, a memoir, last year. I had interviewed my mother in 2003 on cassette about her life. She'd had a lot of tragedies in her life, and she passed away in 2008, and I always thought I was going to write a book about her life. So finally last year, I buckled down and I wrote it. And what I determined was actually my memoir also. It's how my life was influenced by her life with her tragedies. So it's called Limber as a Rag because as I was interviewing her, and she'd always told me that she was like an acrobat when she was little. She grew up very poor because her father died when she was 8 on Christmas Eve in a train accident. And so she always told me that she would just do flips and cartwheels, and kids would stand around and watch her like she was, a vaudevillian or something. And she says, you wouldn't know it now, as she sat in her retirement home with her walker, but I was as limber as a rag. Oh. And I liked the metaphor of that because I think throughout her life I thought she was psychologically limber as a rag, but as she got older, it did get tougher for her psychologically. I think, as you get older, you have more and more losses, and so that's why it's called that. So
love it. I can't wait to see
we'll
it
see.
published.
I'm looking for a publisher.
Yeah. So was that harder or easier to write?
Some parts of it were very hard because some of her stories are very hard.
I would imagine.
Yeah, her first husband took his own life, so. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But I wouldn't be here had he not done that, so that's also kind of interesting.
Well, we need to find you a publisher because I want to read your story. So.
Yeah, thank you.
I know, and we've even got some people in the audience. We've got lots of people that aspire to write a book. I hear some people say it's on my bucket list, or when I retire, I'm going to write a book. Yeah. What advice would you give to future authors?
Well, you can always take workshops and all that, and that helps you, but really, to be a writer, you have to write. And no one wants to hear that. You got to sit down there and just write, and it's just, you got to commit to it every day, and it sounds trite, but that's the way it is, and sometimes I don't want to, but once I get started, then I'm good to go. But,
Hallmark movies make it look so easy, right?
Okay.
Everybody's an author. Anybody can write a book. So, all right, before we wrap up today and take questions from the audience, we have to ask. I know you spend a lot of time writing. Like she said, you've got to spend a lot of time doing it. So when you're not writing, do you read? And if so, can you share some of your favorite authors?
Well, since you asked, I knew you were asking me that. I actually had to think about it because there's so many wonderful books.
Yes.
So I have to say, for fiction, especially for children's books, E.B. White, Charlotte's Web and Stuart Little, you cannot go wrong with that. And then I love Elizabeth Strout. She wrote Olive Kittredge and won a Pulitzer Prize for it, and it became a miniseries. And then she has a series of books with the same characters that are from that I love. I've loved them all. And then Meg Wolitzer. She's written The Female Persuasion, The 10-Year Nap, The Uncoupling, The Wife. I love her writing. But then I like nonfiction and memoirs and biographies, as you could probably guess. But Rick Bragg's Oliver But the Shoutin' is a memoir about his mother, and he grew up very poor in the South. And his writing is sublime. I highly recommend that book. And then Susan Orlean, who wrote The Orchid Thief and the Library Book. Those are nonfiction. Jill Lepore, The Secret History of Wonder Woman, is a fantastic book, and she really did a lot of research for that. It was a comic strip, of course, first, but The Secret History is pretty eye-opening. And Rebecca Skloot, she was here at Purdue twice. She wrote The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. It took her 9 years to write that book, and I've seen her twice at Purdue. It was the common read, I think, when one of my sons was a freshman, so she was visiting twice. So, and then on books on writing, if you want to be a writer, E.B. White wrote The Elements of Style, which is a Bible. Lynn Holland's here. She's a writer and editor retired from Purdue. Anne Lamont's Bird by Bird, excellent. That's how you write. You can't think about the whole book you're going to write. You got to take it bird by bird. And so, and then Natalie Goldberg's Writing Down the Bones, which is a book. When I took that class across the street, Kathy Mayer had us read Writing Down the Bones by Natalie Goldberg, and it's fantastic. And then my favorite humor writer is Irma Bombeck, because I said I've gone to the Irma Bombeck Writers Workshop several times.
I'm going to date myself, but I think I remember reading Irma Bombeck in the newspaper. Right?
Yeah.
Her little column. Yeah. Some of you in the room are nodding.
Books too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good.
So.
Well, that's what we've got today. I would love it if we've got questions. Anybody have questions about any of her books that you just want to talk a little bit more about? We would love to also invite Betty. If you have some words that you want to share about what the experience was like being interviewed and being part of the Dean's Bible, we'd love to hear from you. Questions? Anyone? Yeah, Lynn? Oh, yeah, let's grab the mic. Hang on. Make sure our friends visiting us from across the country can hear us.
So Angie, how are you going to find the publisher for this new book that you've written?
I've sent it out to two, a university press and the Indiana Historical Society Press, but I'm waiting to hear back. So that was in October. It's a lot of waiting.
A lot of sitting and waiting, patience.
Yeah, so I need to keep looking at other avenues, so we'll see.
Okay.
But if you any suggestions, I would gladly take them.
Yeah, Lynn, are you offering? Yeah.
Lynn is actually a beta reader. She's actually reading it right now.
Oh, fabulous. Oh, I want to get on that list. Yeah, that would be, yeah. So, Betty, would you care to say a few words? We've got the microphone close by.
Thank you. I think we live, from a very personal perspective, I think we live our lives on kind of a day-to-day basis. And I think working with Angie on the Dean's Bible was, a golden opportunity to think about life on a longer continuum. And I don't think it was until that point that I realized that the 5 deans over a century, each of us had part of the civil rights movement that just fell on our tour of duty. And that's pretty remarkable, that there were 5 of us in sequence who participated in the dean's activity at Purdue. But then to be here at a time in history where, it was Title IX and desegregation and Section 504 of the Rehab Act and ADA. Each piece of that whole civil rights century, basically, fell to us. And I don't know quite how that was handled on other campuses, but it was very sequential for us. And at least for me, there was, that little army behind me, leading cheers and understanding how important that was. So I think I was privileged by working with Angie and having this opportunity to back off and kind of get a broader perspective of the activity that I'd been involved in. Those are just unique points in life that make a difference, but sometimes you can't see them. And as Angie was talking about getting into writing, one of my favorite quotes, and I think it belongs to Pasteur, is chance favors the prepared mind.
Well, Betty, you talked about the different civil rights pieces. Betty was the one responsible for making curb cuts in the sidewalks on campus. And the story is in the Dean's Bible. And handicap accessible restrooms and the parking spots, the things we take for granted today. Betty was in charge of that in 1973, wasn't it, I think, when the act was, mandated.
Well, thank you guys so much. Betty, thank you for sharing those words from yesteryear, and we're just thrilled that, Angie, you took time out of your day to share about all of your writings, and we can't wait to read more, and we're just so proud you're a Purdue alum.
All right. Well, thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks everyone for watching. We'll see you next time.